It's me, Edward O'Neill. I'm back again to orient you a little bit towards week 5 of this online course in the science of learning. This week is a little bit of deja vu. That is, you're going to do again things that are very similar to what you did last week. Last week you explored some research-based learning concepts, and this week you're going to explore some other ones. We thought there was too much material for someone to really work with it and have it settle in well in just 1 week, so we gave you kind of 2 weeks to do this because we thought in 1 week the cognitive load would be too high. You'll also continue learning to understand instructional problems. In earlier weeks you may have done interviewing and observation. You might have gathered and analyzed data to represent it to people to understand the problem better. And this week you'll work on doing a lit review to find research that's pertinent to the problem you're solving, and you'll work on developing a testable hypothesis. So I wanted to walk you through this a little bit using the piece of instructional material that we've looked at from time to time. It's that guide for training home health care providers. So what you really want to know with some of these concepts is, how would I actually use them? How are they being used in a piece of instructional materials, or not being used? How could I maybe adapt this piece of instructional material? So in that document, they state that the goal is that people who are trained complain that they don't feel prepared. So one thing you could do in terms of evidence is make sure you measure whether or not they feel more prepared than people who did the previous kind of training. If the training works, you could have fewer people saying they feel unprepared. Customer satisfaction ratings should go up too, so you might want to gather evidence about that. Those might be the quantitative numbers you look at that tells you if the learning you've designed has really worked. Now, you may have too few people going through the training program to get big numbers that add up to something that seem meaningful, and so you might do interviews with people, both who did the training and who received the care, to see if the results are what the training was looking for. In terms of learning science concepts, one is practice and feedback. You have to practice something a lot before you get good at it, and the practice really requires feedback. If you practice the wrong things, you'll be doing it in the wrong way for a long, long time. So the amount of training that the book suggests is these kind of short workshops. It's very unlikely in a short workshop that you're going to practice enough to get really terrific at something. So you might need to study some kind of way of measuring skills over a longer term to see if the people are continuing to get practice. How are they going to get feedback if they're on the job? Who's going to give them feedback? Things don't end with a training. Learning doesn't end with a training. There might be some other mentorship piece that's needed in order to make sure that people have good feedback. In terms of skill acquisition, it doesn't happen quickly. That's another thing that happens more slowly. To go from not knowing the skill or not doing it well to being guided to it being able to do it easily and adapt to new situations, those are the kind of gradations of skill training. Some people might already have the skills that they're being trained on, so you might decide that it'd be valuable to measure their skill level before and after, and as I said, even sometime weeks or months later. If you followed Vygotsky's theory of the zone of proximal development, if you measured the student's skills, the learner skills, you could put them in groups of people that were similar to them, so everyone could see where they can improve. They can see it with their own eyes by interacting with fellow learners. In terms of motivation, people's motivation might be intrinsic or extrinsic. You might want to identify what those sources of motivation are and compare the results. If people who have more intrinsic motivation are more successful in the training and thereafter, you might want to find a way for the training to actually emphasize intrinsic motivation or try and build on it. And of course, you would really like to know if you were really achieving that or not too. In terms of goal orientation, remember you can be oriented towards improving or towards achieving a certain thing. That workbook guide already suggests to people exactly what they need to achieve. It could be good if you thought this is important during the training for them to see how they're improving, to actually show them performance improvement as opposed to achievement as they went along. In terms of the learning concepts of something like working memory and cognitive load, the training that's described there seems nicely kind of broken down, and so I don't know if it could really be improved in that regard. People with more working memory tend to score higher on intelligence tests, so it's hard to really change people's working memory, but you could try and make sure that the training didn't put them in the learners in cognitive overload. It's doubtful it would from the way it looks, but you might decide that that was something you wanted to study or address. In terms of problem solving, the approach in that piece of instructional material is to train people on very specific skills and techniques and knowledge and attitudes. It's not structured around problem solving. Whereas home health workers, you might find out from interviews that they go into situations where there's a novel problem that they need to solve. And therefore, what you want to do in the training is give them some straightforward problems to solve and then give them some more complicated ones to actually teach problem solving. And again, you would want to make sure that this actually had an impact that you would want to measure afterwards. So this is just one example of the way one piece of instructional material could be adapted or even just implemented using learning science concepts. And if you're going to use learning science concepts, you shouldn't take them on faith. It's not an article of faith. You should use them because you think you'll see a definite result, and then you should plan the way in which you're going to make sure that that result actually happens. You owe it to the learners, and you owe it to yourself. And as I think we've seen in this course before, when people face a significant challenge and overcome it, it makes them feel good about themselves. And so you can give people that feeling when you design instruction for them, and you can have a bit of that feeling yourself when you take a piece of instructional material and really try and use learning science to improve it if it needs improvement. But I tend to think everything could be improved at least a little bit.